It's a pleasure, Madam Director, to have had a few minutes before this discussion to hear about the work that you're doing and how it compares to some of the experience that I have seen in Europe. And I think on some things you are clearly ahead. I will offer one more apology, which is that I'm going to be deliberately slightly provocative. I'm not here to cause trouble, but I would like to invite some ideas and some thinking. And you don't have to agree, of course, and I realize that your context is different, but one of the good ways to learn is to discuss and to share ideas. And it seems that I've picked a strange week to talk about the role of private capital in urban development. My title today is The Essence of City Competitiveness, but the real theme is about the role that capital flows, international money flows, play in promoting city and urban development. So in the public sector, we often focus on the smart cities concept, on sustainability, on having an integrated strategy, on skills, and on science and technology. We tend to focus on those things: smart, sustainable, skills, strategy, science and technology. One of the biggest issues that we all need to face is how we finance the kind of urban development that we want. What is going to drive this new urban development? It needs money at the end of the day. But many of the tools we use to rank cities focus on a whole series of different concerns: liquidity, GDP, transparency, political volatility. But I'd like to just focus on money for the moment. So there are all these ranking mechanisms that focus on how cities are doing. They take into account all of these concerns, but they don't always talk about money in a very direct sense. So the real concern is not just money, but where the money is coming from. Does it matter? Does the source of the money matter? And how might Taiwanese cities do better if they connected with the global capital flows? Or might this be a problem? Open question. Because we in the public sector are setting ambitions and standards for urban development. When we do this, we write nice strategy documents. But does the domestic financial system have enough finance to drive the urban development ambitions that we are setting for these cities? And by the domestic finance system, I mean both public and private sources. But does local capital exist in the right volume to deliver the urban development ambitions that we want to see? So let's go a little bit deeper. In London, the ownership of our office stock has changed dramatically in the last 30 years. You know that the British are obsessed with the history of their war with Germany. But look at the change in this red area. Look at the change over the last 40 years in the level of German ownership of London-based office properties. And in the last 6 years, these patterns have increased yet further. And the assumption is that more than 80% of the office stock in London is owned by international firms or international pension funds. Is this a problem, or actually is this an advantage? Britain has come to the opinion that we don't really care too much about the source of the capital, because we know that even if they buy the building, they can't take it home. So we believe somebody tried to buy Tower Bridge, but they couldn't move it back to Texas. So this is a description of some of the biggest and most dynamic real estate market cities in the world, and you'll see that many of them have quite substantial proportions of international ownership. And on the one extreme amongst these five, you have Tokyo with a very small global ownership, and London, as I said before, we don't really mind who owns, because we have the biggest market, it's the most liquid market, and it attracts global capital that boosts our economy. So then, when you think about the massive amount of global capital that invests in real estate, you'll know that that money spreads across the world. But 50%, half of all that money, is spent only in 30 cities. And let's talk about those cities, and let's think about the change in that pattern. You'll notice, patriotically, okay, the issue is, are you advancing, are you declining, or are you staying the same? Of course, it's the big global capitals that attract most of the real estate investment. And those of you who know your buildings, your architecture, or have traveled will know that it's the small number of iconic buildings that attract the mega investments. The amount of money being invested in real estate is increasing dramatically, and we think it will continue to increase. We expect $1 trillion to be invested each year in real estate by 2030. And cities across the world are competing to attract some of this investment in order to drive their urban development strategies. Question for you, question for us today is, does this matter for Taiwanese cities? Taiwanese money is part of that $1 trillion that's being invested across the world in other cities. So, let's think about the cities that were dominant a few years ago. Quite a predictable list. They tend to be coastal cities, gateway cities, and cities with policies that allow the importing and exporting of investment without too much restrictive legislation. But the list may change. You'll see that this is the list from 2008, when the so-called BRIC countries were supposed to emerge. You may recall that this acronym, BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, China, was supposed to summarize the countries that would rise dramatically in the following period. But the cities that have started to emerge more quickly are medium-sized cities that are strong on technology and have a better story on sustainability. And these cities are now starting to attract global investment. So the summary here is that there's big competition for this probable $1 billion worth of real estate investment. And the assumption is that cities in your region will expand even more quickly. But let's look away from the assumptions at what actually was spent last year. What money was spent in the real estate market in the last 12 months, the period between 2012 and 2013. And you'll see that in this region of the world, there weren't so many countries that were attracting large increases in the amount of real estate investment. In fact, the areas in dark blue had a decrease in the amount of real estate investment. And then when you look at where this money went, this is actual cash that was spent last year, global real estate investment. It went into different sectors in different proportions. Internet is changing the pattern of demand for retail space. Money flow into housing has been weak. Money flow into office and industrial space has been good. And then if we look at the most active city markets for real estate investment in the Asia-Pacific region, sorry to strain your eyesight, you'll see that the heavyweight champion is Tokyo. Taipei is here.
那台北在中间。
Net reduction in the amount of global real estate urban development capital coming into your city. And this chart on the right, these lines indicate the year-on-year change in the volume of global capital coming into these cities. So this is what's going on in each of these markets, and it sort of indicates that Tokyo, Hong Kong, Sydney, Singapore look as though they may pull ahead because there is more global capital flowing into those markets to help realize their urban development ambitions. Is this a problem for Taiwanese cities, or doesn't it matter? And again, to go a little bit deeper, foreign capital isn't just one pot of money. There are differing kinds of foreign capital. On the one hand, you have so-called core investors. These are people like pension funds who will invest for the long term but will accept relatively low rates of return. Might in one sense be called patient capital, long-term patient capital. On the other hand, you have much more aggressive so-called opportunistic capital that is prepared to buy risky property but expects a very high rate of return. And to go a little bit deeper,
再深入一点，
let's look at the actual players. Who is it that's buying this property? Who is it? Which are the companies? Which organizations are behind control this international capital? So this is a list of the biggest 10 investors in Europe, but they buy property globally. And you'll see that they are mainly pension funds or big insurance companies. So second from the bottom, you'll see in the UK, Prudential is a big life insurance company. And at the top,
they also have branches in Taiwan,
Yeah.
Prudential Insurance.
big players. And because they operate in your market, the question is, why don't they, well, if you want me to be crude, forgive me, your pension contributions are financing global investment in other cities around the world. So who are the top buyers and sellers? As you know, the market consists of buyers and sellers. Who are the top players globally? You'll see a lot of American companies, some Chinese ones, some Russians, some Germans. This is a mixture of national backgrounds, but by dollar value you can see that they are huge. And the people buying are also global and international. Often it is pension funds, but not always so. And some people are developing for sale, other people are just selling their holdings according to their commercial need. So you've seen the cities that this money goes to, you've seen the different kinds of capital and their different strategies, long-term or short, and you've seen the list of buyers and sellers who make up the marketplace, or at least the top end of the market.
至少是前几个。
These are the biggest buyers and sellers in your region. The sellers are a fairly international list. You'll see that the buyers are much more dominated by Chinese investors. Given the underlying issues within Taiwan's politics, this is an issue you'll want to think about. Again, I ask the question that I posed at the beginning.
再一次，这是我一开始提的提问。
Does the source of global capital, does the origin of global capital, which country it comes from, does it matter? And I don't want to stray into your local politics, but this isn't about Chinese capital, it's about any kind of foreign capital.
这不只是中国来的国际资金，
Because you'll see from the global list that many of the biggest buyers are American and European. So, I'd like to try and draw the themes together by giving you the argument again in 5 sentences. We in the public sector set these grand urban development visions in response to political imperative and the public demand. and our own professional judgment.
而我们是专业的决定者。
Does the local system generate enough money to finance those urban development ambitions? And what could Taiwanese cities do, or what could national policy do, to make it easier for some of that global capital to be invested in your cities? What are the risks, but what are the benefits of having foreign capital? What kind of capital might you be interested in? And what kind of partners, what kind of players might you want to engage in your market? And earlier this week, some friends of mine who are real estate brokers were in Taiwan to talk to Taiwanese investors about placing investment opportunities in Europe. So you can be sure that Taiwanese money is part of this global flow. The question is, will Taiwan host a larger percentage of this global trillion-dollar investment pool that we expect to be available by 2030? I'm not here to tell you that the answer is you must open your doors to global capital. I'm just presenting a local version of a discussion that European cities are having every week. Some people end up closing their doors to global capital without realizing it. Others end up open to global capital without realizing it. My only suggestion is that it's better to have a deliberate policy with safeguards and the right incentives according to what your goals are. Madam Director, thank you very much, and I will try and respond to